Right on time. Hello, everybody. Good evening. I'm really happy to be here and to be your host for tonight for the great event Cartooning for Sciences. And first of all, because we're really happy to have him, I'd like you to welcome with me Martin Vetterli, President of the EPFL. Martin Vetterli.
Thank you very much. Thank you. It's a great pleasure to be here for, I think it's my last official event. And it's great that it's about a topic I really like and to welcome great people on stage here. So why do we do, let me see if I have my slides. Okay. Why do we do an event on cartooning for science? You might think this is not a very serious subject, but I think you will see it's a very serious subject. Why we use cartoons for communicating science is that it gives a different point of view on scientific questions. It's a very efficient way to get messages across. I'll give a few examples that I have used for a while now. And I also like, sometimes scientists and technologists are sort of, in French we say, le nez dans le guidon. We do something, we really think it's the most important thing in the world. We forget the implication for the world or for society. And then every now and then, a cartoonist shows that it's a little bit more complicated than what we thought. And I think it's important that we keep this critical distance and that we have this outside view that great cartoonists actually give on what we do. Now, cartoons are also very useful when you give talks, because every now and then you need to sort of lighten up the ambiance, right? And so, if you talk about cybercrime, you have a great cartoon exactly about this. But since this is also a science talk, of course, I did my homework, and I read a Nature review on neuroscience paper. I sort of skimmed it, I have to admit. But it's actually an interesting question, right? Why is a cartoon funny? Why is a joke funny? How does it work from a neuroscience point of view? And some people actually studied this. That's a review paper. So the review paper looks at dozens or hundreds of papers that actually study how humor actually works. And humor is probably, okay, so there's always this debate, is something uniquely human and animals don't have it, consciousness. Sense of humor maybe is uniquely human, but I'm not absolutely sure, because I think some animals actually also play games and have a sense of humor to some extent. And so the way it works is you put a person in an MRI machine, right, truly, and you show cartoons or you tell them jokes and you look at how this works. And as you probably know, the best jokes and the best cartoons come out of a tension in some sense of something that seems obvious, but then you have a completely different thing that shows up. And this actually shows up in the various parts of the brain that are actually active when you show a cartoon or you tell a joke. So there is truly a scientific basis for this. Now, I promised to tell you a little bit about my career in cartoons. That will be very short, but you'll see that I started early. So when I was a kid, I read Le Petit Nicolas, and I'm sure many of you here of the right age group, read Le Petit Nicolas. And the cartoonist, the guy doing the drawings is, of course, Sampé, and Sampé did many covers of The New Yorker. Now, The New Yorker is sort of an acquired taste, but some of us have lived in New York, and so this has become sort of a central basis of our culture. And certainly the cover of The New Yorker is super interesting, right? Because it always has a message which is very strong. This one is how I looked at science, okay? I hope I go back to my lab and I still look at science this way. But in the meantime, I've done other things. And of course, this is sort of the romantic view, right? The crazy scientist, the Professor Tournesol, who barely knows how to boil an egg while solving extremely complex problems. But then there is an actual cartoon that I bought in the streets in New York in the 80s. So it's not a New Yorker cartoon. It's some guy who was just selling his drawings in the street. And it was about the tenure track system in the US. Well, I don't think the cartoonist actually knew about the tenure track system, but this ended up being on my door when I was a junior professor. And of course, the message, I think, is very general, right? The trouble with the rat race is that even when you win, you're still a rat. And this is a very profound message, I assure you. Okay, at least it was for me. So, I was being very clear to my bosses that I wouldn't end up being a rat. At the time, there was a lot about publish and perish. And so I did some research. And because still people complain about publish or perish, the tenure track system, the promotion system, prices, and so on. So I did some research, and the earliest cartoon I could find was from 1966. It's the typical Ivy League cartoon. That could be Harvard. And you can see the scene. I'm not going to explain it. It's completely obvious. But somehow in the 60s, this was already funny, right? By now, of course, it's an industrial scale research operation, so it's not that funny anymore, actually. Then, if I look at how I ended up being here and giving my final introductory remarks, this cartoon is quite relevant, right? If you're an academic, you go for advice, and somebody tells you at this point in your career, your only possible promotion is to management, where you will stop doing the work you love. That was the first image, the Santé cover, right? And use a skill set you don't have and we don't teach. And that's a little bit the problem of academic management sometimes. And some of my colleagues I can hear are in the room. The other thing you learn is that you go to very important meetings with lots of people and so on. And in the end, it is what's called the Di Lampedusa strategy. There is a Wikipedia page about it. If you have not read Il Gattopardo, fantastic book by Di Lampedusa, or if you haven't seen the movie, Luchino Visconti, please do. These are both masterpieces. And it's all about, if something has to change, well, if we want to have everything stay the same, then we have to change how we do things, right? And unfortunately, this happens all too much, also in academia. And here is, an illustration exactly of that phenomenon. But the last one, which is very relevant to the current situation in Switzerland, and I'm sorry to have to tell you this story, is, we go to these meetings, and I don't get it. We had all these meetings, and the budget keeps decreasing. So that's the current discussion in Switzerland for my friends from New York. Believe it or not, Switzerland has budget problems. And, the first thing they talk about cutting is education, which is, of course, the last thing you should cut. Okay, now at EPFL, we have missions. And the three missions, you know them, it's teaching, research, and innovation. So I have one illustration for each one. The one I'm sure you have seen. The teacher in front of first graders asks, before we go to division, does anybody want to share any feelings about multiplication? So I have to sometimes remind people that we are essentially a certification agency. So it's not so much about, how do you feel about analyse 1, 2, 3. It's about, can you actually solve the problem? Okay. So I like this cartoon for this. We need to maintain academic standards. The second one is on research, and it has a funny background. So I think I could do a survey, but I don't really see the people. But to me, the cartoon is completely obvious, right? On second thought, you hunt, I gather. Okay, so this is the Neanderthals' division of labor. Okay, now if you look at the cartoon, you have to look very carefully if you have doubts. And I'm on thin ice here. I'll tell you why. The way I see the cartoon, and I almost wrote to the cartoonist, and maybe Tom can help me solve this conundrum, is the lady sort of gives back the spear and says, oh, after thinking about it, you go hunting, I'll do the gathering, right? Now, I use this in a context where we were discussing about research culture and the fact that in certain areas of research, we don't have enough female researchers. And my theory, okay, you can disagree and we can discuss it over apéro. My theory is that research was a gentleman's game for centuries in England, the Royal Society, and so on. And this gentleman's game, the rules of the game were set by men, okay? Because it was essentially a gentleman's club. And so these rules are not necessarily welcoming to people that have a different approach, like people who want to solve societal problem rather than just solving a very, very narrow issue, right? And so my point was to say research should be changed, right? From hunting, it should maybe become gathering, right? Solving holistic problems for society, like climate change and so on. But I got into hot water because somebody in the room said, no, you don't understand. It's exactly the opposite. The guy doesn't want to hunt, he gives the spear to the lady and so on. So we get into a huge debate, which is still open. That's why I might actually need the help of Tom Toro on this one. The last mission we have is innovation, and there is always a debate, when is it research, when is it applied research, when is it innovation? And you see these two guys. I didn't discover fire, but I was the first one to encircle it with stones. Remember that the World Wide Web was invented at CERN, 50 kilometers from here. That's sort of inventing fire. And most of the business of the World Wide Web is in Silicon Valley, which partly is to put stones around the World Wide Web, okay, in my humble opinion. Good. So these were the missions of EPFL in 3 cartoons. And with this, I'm very, very happy to introduce our cartoonists of tonight, who will be debating such issues. So the first one is Tom Toro, award-winning cartoonist and children's book author. He has a syndicated comic strip. He has been many, many times in the New York Times and has received a number of awards. And of course is very visible in this field of cartoons and children's book drawing. And he drew the cartoons and I paid the rights, Tom, I assure you, because I've used it many, many times. Because in one cartoon, it summarizes the problem of climate change and civilization. The guy, they are back to Neanderthal times, and the little guy, the smart ass from Wall Street, says, yes, the planet got destroyed, but for a beautiful moment in time, we created a lot of value for shareholders. So, we have these COP29 and, all sorts of good intention things and so on, but the bottom line is that as long as what runs the place is shareholder value, we'll probably end up like this. I'm sorry to be slightly pessimistic on this one, but I think it's actually realism at this point in time. The second one is, of course, the one that is related to my current job. You have to be very, very careful because after a while, everybody around you, by magic, always agrees with you. Okay, but maybe the reason is the one that is beautifully drawn by Tom Toro here. That you got rid of all the dissenting voices. Good. He is the first cartoonist on our panel, and thank you very much, Tom, for having come from New York to participate in this event. And you share this with Patrick Chappatte, whom we know very well. And I'm going to do free advertising for Patrick. We were 10 days ago, we were actually watching Patrick's show here in the Lausanne region. So he's also a great stand-up comedian on top of being a great cartoonist. And really, if you can get it was actually sold out the evening we went. So please, run and try to get tickets. It's a great show. But we knew this because we had Patrick Chappatte at the Journée Scientifique et Pédagogique, which is an annual event of our professors and senior management. And he intervened on the topic of creativity, because I've always been obsessed, I have to say, with creativity, because I think research is about being creative. And I come back to the publish and perish cartoon, right? It's not about quantity, it's about quality, and quality comes from creativity in research. And I think being a great cartoonist is being incredibly creative. And we were so impressed by his performance that we gave him a doctora honoris causa. Okay, true. And when people tell me about doctora honoris causa we gave here at EPFL, They mention only two names, Claude Nobs, the creator of the Montreux Jazz Festival, and Patrick Chappatte. All the other ones that went on to get Nobel Prizes and so on, people forget. So you're in very good company, Patrick. Good. And, you know, I've known him for a while. He knows I like his cartoons. So every now and then, he actually sends me one of the cartoons with a little dedication. The first one, of course, is on the same theme as the shareholder value one, right? So, you know, the capitalist says, one day, son, this will be your problem to solve. That's exactly the problem we are facing, right? Short-termism versus solving long-term problem. And the second cartoon, again, I'm on thin ice, I have to say. It's a delicate topic, and in some sense, Patrick was making fun of me, because we had occupations at EPFL, and so, you know, a long time ago, you know, probably I would have stood there with top occupation of Vietnam. At that point, I was in a different position, I have to say, and we were not very amused by the occupation here on campus. Anyway, this is, as I said, my last intervention, and I'm moving on to become Rat Emeritus, and I thank you for your attention and enjoy the show. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Martin.
Bravo.
Now I'll give the tribune to Laurence Danguy. Laurence here, she's a researcher at university on, I will be precise, on contemporary art history and lecturer here at CDH. She's a cartoon specialist, so she'll give a brief speech about how it was possible to arrive at this point in the world where we have two wonderful cartoonists here tonight.
Alors les deux dessins que vous avez sous les yeux, à gauche de Patrick Chappatte, à droite de Tom Toro, sont des dessins de presse qui thématisent la relation entre l'homme, l'espace et les extraterrestres. C'est du moins ainsi qu'on les comprend spontanément. On comprend également que ces dessins racontent quelque chose, ne serait-ce qu'en raison de la présence d'un texte dans les bulles du dessin de gauche, ainsi que dans la légende du dessin de droite. Un dessin de presse, c'est donc un dessin qui raconte quelque chose. Or, ces dessins parlants sont le résultat d'une longue histoire. À l'origine du dessin de presse se trouve la caricature. Une première étape a consisté dans les recherches de Léonard de Vinci sur la difformité parfaite de la face, du visage donc, au début du XVIe siècle. Ces essais graphiques sont la contrepartie des recherches sur le beau idéal, le beau qui occupe alors intensément les artistes italiens. La caricature, à proprement parler, elle naît avec les frères Carracci, les Carracci, quelques décennies plus tard, à la toute fin du XVIe siècle, toujours en Italie. Il s'agit de réaliser des portraits grotesques où l'on éprouve une série de physionomies, des visages de différents types qui sont liés à des caractères. Ces dessins sont réalisés à la plume, mais ils ne racontent pas vraiment d'histoire. Leur but, c'est de créer une beauté de la difformité. Et aussi, c'est d'amuser. On a quand même tendance à regarder ces visages les uns après les autres et à imaginer le contexte où ceux-ci pourraient prendre place, à imaginer une petite histoire en somme. À vrai dire, on trouve déjà dès le début du XVIe siècle, après 1520, ce que l'on va rétrospectivement appeler des caricatures, c'est-à-dire des dessins qui poursuivent un but polémique. Ces dessins servent dans le contexte des guerres de religion qui font rage en Europe entre le XVIe et le XVIIIe siècle, à dénigrer l'adversaire et ainsi à rallier le peuple à sa cause. Alors d'un côté, les catholiques attaquent les protestants, ils les chargent selon le terme approprié, et les protestants, eux, chargent les catholiques. Le dénigrement du camp adverse passe par la mise en scène dévalorisante des personnages, ainsi que par un texte qui est contenu ici dans les phylactères, c'est les bandeaux. On cherche à rire de l'autre pour le déconsidérer. Ces phylactères, on va du reste les retrouver bien plus tard dans la bande dessinée, avant qu'ils ne se transforment en bulles et finissent par intégrer le dessin de presse. La caricature, dans ce contexte-là, c'est une arme de propagande puissante dont on sait par les historiens qu'elle a joué un rôle important dans la formation des opinions publiques. Une nouvelle étape est franchie au XIXe siècle, avec la diffusion massive des périodiques illustrés grâce au progrès des techniques d'impression. On trouve ainsi des caricatures dans les périodiques satiriques, mais aussi dans les périodiques d'éducation populaire, comme ici à droite, avec le magasin pittoresque. Les têtes caricaturées, donc c'est à droite, rappellent les portraits grotesques d'Agostino Carracci. Ils servent à illustrer la théorie de l'évolution. Le dessin de presse est désormais accompagné d'un texte et souvent d'une légende. Ici, le texte relativise la théorie de l'évolution humaine au profit de l'influence du milieu social sur l'individu, donc le contraire. Certains thèmes scientifiques suscitent un intérêt important dans la presse et plus largement dans l'édition, dont justement la théorie de l'évolution. Ce thème est traité soit sérieusement, comme dans l'illustration de gauche, qui entend transmettre le schéma de l'évolution, soit de manière satirique, comme dans l'almanach du Punch en 1882, où la théorie de Charles Darwin est ridiculisée. Ceci comme dans de très nombreuses caricatures où Darwin est associé à un singe. Cela dit, le dessin de presse, ce n'est pas seulement le résultat d'une longue histoire graphique, mais c'est également l'histoire d'une intégration d'une large culture visuelle qui comprend des gravures, des peintures, des illustrations de livres, des bandes dessinées, le cinéma, la photographie, l'art vidéo, les mèmes, tout ce qui est visuel. Alors certaines références visuelles sont somme toute très anciennes, comme la danse macabre, à droite donc, et le robot anthropomorphe de Patrick Chappatte, aux membres grêles et à la tête opaque, se rattache ainsi à la figuration des squelettes qui représentaient la mort dans de nombreuses gravures du Moyen-Âge. Il s'agissait alors de défier les morts, tout comme de défier les vivants. Il s'agissait surtout d'interroger les certitudes humaines. Alors ceci dans un contexte où les populations étaient décimées par les guerres et les épidémies. Une référence s'impose à de nombreux dessins montrant l'humain dans l'espace. C'est le très célèbre film de Stanley Kubrick, 2001, l'Odyssée de l'espace, d'une part avec le personnage engoncé dans sa tenue de cosmonaute, à droite donc, dont on ne sait plus trop s'il est humain, comme le robot des ressources humaines de Patrick Chappatte. S'impose aussi le fameux œil rouge d'Al 9000 qui est omniprésent dans le film, au centre de l'affiche, et qu'on le retrouve cet œil rouge dans les écouteurs du robot. Alors en reprenant, et c'est ça qui est important, un élément formel, on intègre en fait également un contenu. Et ici, le contenu, c'est un humain devenu étrange et un calculateur d'intelligence artificielle inquiétant. Ces références peuvent éventuellement provenir des nouveaux médias, tels ce dessin présent sur Internet, où la chaîne de l'évolution se termine par un homme regardant dans un télescope. Dans le dessin de Patrick Chappatte, le télescope est posé sur une planète. Et ce n'est plus un homme qui s'en sert, mais un extraterrestre. Alors pour terminer, je reviens sur les dessins de Patrick Chappatte et de Tom Toro du début de ma présentation. Ces dessins présentent donc des similarités formelles évidentes, le globe, les extraterrestres qui évoluent dans l'espace, un espace qui est symbolisé par la couleur noire. Ces dessins ont cependant une signification différente. Le dessin de Patrick Chappatte célèbre l'attribution du prix Nobel de physique en 2017 aux Suisses Michel Mayor et Didier Queloz pour la première découverte d'une exoplanète en 1995. Le dessin de Tom Toro, lui, se réfère au retour sur Terre de la capsule Soyouz avec à son bord un équipage russo-américain. La capsule avait quitté la Station spatiale internationale le 30 mars dans un contexte géopolitique très tendu qui avait généré de forts doutes sur la réussite de l'exposition. Alors il est à vrai dire impossible de comprendre la signification de ces deux dessins sans connaître le contexte de leur publication, contexte qui était évidemment connu du lecteur des journaux au moment où ces actualités ont été publiées. On peut toujours, en revanche, savourer les dessins et même leur humour décalé au travers, par exemple, de la légende de Tom Toro, prêtant l'intention aux occupants de la capsule de se ravitailler sur la prochaine aire de repos, ou de celle de Patrick Chappatte, faisant part de la découverte d'une vie intelligente dans la région du lac Léman. Car c'est en effet comme toute image, pour toute image, le dessin de presse demande à être regardé, à être compris et à être explicité. Merci de votre attention.
Thank you, Laurence. No, we decided that what's the best about to learn about cartoon is to let their authors speak about them. So I'll give the floor to Tom, and you've got 6 minutes to describe 5 of your favorite drawings, combining science and cartoon.
Wonderful, thank you. Feels a bit like a quiz show, you know. Thank you for this amazing invitation. I'm glad to be the token American on the panel. It's a great pleasure. Given how things are going in the country, I might decide to stay, if you have room for me. Yeah, it's a great honor to be here. My first cartoon is, you've seen this one before. Yes, the planet got destroyed, but for a beautiful moment in time, we created a lot of value for shareholders. This is my most popular cartoon. I made it back in 2012. And it was actually at that time a response to the financial crisis, the Great Recession in the United States. But it has since then evolved to take on a meaning in reference to climate change, or really any given geopolitical event that happens to be occurring when people choose to post it. That last phrase, we created a lot of value for shareholders, has been replaced many, many times. I've lost control of this cartoon. It's become sort of a meme that people use on social media because it just resonates with a sense of humor, but also maybe helplessness that people are feeling, unfortunately, in the face of these larger trends that are happening that seem to be negative. But I remain hopeful that we will find solutions, and I leave it up to the scientists to do that. So I'm begging you all to please make my most popular cartoon irrelevant. That would be wonderful. My next cartoon is this one. It has no words. It's a moth flying along. The moth has an idea, and then the moth is attracted to the idea and then hits the light bulb and dies. So this is a little bit of a cartooning trick where, you know, often light bulbs are used just as sort of an abstract sense to represent that a thought is occurring for the character. But I thought, okay, well, what if we actually make it become a physical object? So the second and third panel, it becomes a physical object, attracts the moth to it. So that's how it works as sort of a cartoon mechanism in the logic itself of the drawing. But it also, to me, just represents the danger of the seductiveness of our ideas, and how if we have ideas that maybe we focus too much on, or that obscure things that are other things that are happening in our lives, and we neglect those things, then they could lead, you know, to our downfall. And to me, I think that kind of is a good reminder to keep things in balance, which I often apply to the disciplines that we have to have in our own society. How much science should we have? How much humanity should we have? Environmentalism, the balance of technology and nature, that sort of thing. And this one is another technology cartoon. An algorithm matched us as soulmates, and yet it can't suggest a movie we both want to watch. I think we've found ourselves in that situation before. So I work mostly for The New Yorker, which is a magazine that includes, you know, great journalism within it, and the cartoons have to live within the space of that journalism and not distract from it. So a very important point to remember is that comedy does not exist outside of context. Context is extremely important for how the comedy is received and what you're creating it for. And so when I'm trying to process ideas that I'm thinking of, whether they be about technology, science, human relationships, how to choose a movie with a date, you know, that sort of thing, I have to remind myself that I'm creating a cartoon that needs to exist within an article that might be about a war going on, or might be about the latest novel by a famous novelist. And so it has to exist on its own, but it has to exist in a way that speaks to the human relationship involved to the idea. It can't sort of require a greater context outside of our own lived experience, what we bring to the cartoon and our own impressions upon it. So that's the sort of context in which my humor has to live. And here's one, auto reply. I am dead and will have limited access to email. Maybe as we near retirement, we can begin to appreciate this cartoon a little bit. This cartoon is also kind of a test in how you interpret it. Is your idea of hell the fact that you will continue to have to answer email? Or is your idea of hell that you'll have limited Wi-Fi access? Do you want to be away from it, or do you want it to be more convenient? So yeah.
It's actually a good idea to implement.
Yeah, as an away message before you die. Play a joke on your kids.
I'll think
yeah, for
about
sure.
it.
And this final one, let me just make sure I'm not skipping over things I wanted to mention here. Yeah. And the final one that I just wanted to mention is this one. We began with a hip replacement and just sort of riffed off that. So he's kind of a jazz doctor, you know, a jazz surgeon, wherever inspiration takes him. So for this one, I like this one because I drew this one at the time that my father was actually getting a double hip replacement. So that's what gave me the idea. Thank you, Dad, for inspiring many cartoons over the years. And I like the way this, I just want to draw attention to the fact that it's very important that, even though it doesn't really make sense in a technology way, that the fishbowl be the head of the person, because you still needed some personality. You still needed like eyeballs to look at. And I like the way that the wife is like, her expression is sort of neutral, right? She might actually prefer a husband who has a vacuum cleaner for a leg. That could be useful.
I love that this cartoon makes you laugh yourself.
Yeah.
Does it happen very often?
You have to find your own jokes funny, right? Because you don't know if other people will. So this one also brings the sort of foundational myth in regards to the way that I think about technology, and a myth that I learned early on in school that has always stuck with me. I don't know if you're familiar, you probably are, with the myth of Daedalus, about the greatest scientist in ancient Greece, who became entrapped, you know, by his own inventions. He was sort of cursed by his own genius to not only create this monster, the Minotaur, but then had to have to contain it within the labyrinth, and then, of course, ultimately to try and escape, and inventing the wings, inventing human flight, but ultimately ending up in the death of his son, Icarus, right? So it's the double-edged sword of technology. You know, how do we maintain the balance? You know, I always come back to the idea of sustainability, balance, not letting, you know, certain aspects run wild and roughshod over others. So I think this cartoon is a great humorous example of you can go too far with an idea, right? It might be entertaining for a while, and it might result in kind of this Frankenstein creation, but where's the humanity? You know, right? Always keep track of how this is impacting people. Always keep track of how science, where's the humanity within the discipline that you're working with? Because ultimately, the impact on people is the most important thing in anything that we accomplish. And now I'm going to turn it over to a far better cartoonist. Patrick, on to you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So we get only 5 cartoons. We want to see more.
You have to pay.
Okay.
This is the free portion.
That's why. Well, I will introduce myself in cartoons, though some of you might be familiar with my work, maybe. But first, since the topic of this meeting is the connection between science and cartooning, to me, the very obvious, natural, deep connection between the two is Martin Vetterli. And I want to salute him and thank him for inviting us here, a big fan of cartoons and a defender of science. So you are the connection, Martin. And you mentioned that I'm touring actually now a kind of stand-up show conference, and I usually start my show, one of the first cartoons I show is about my ancestor. It's this cartoon. And now I'm taking a second look at the cartoon, and I'm thinking, actually, is it an artist or is it a scientist that I am representing? Because if you take a closer look, if you zoom in, I don't know if you can see what this guy is drawing. You can see a wheel, you can see a E equal MC squared. So, and that raised the question that Martin raised before, the similarities between the artist and the scientist. Actually, was the cave painter an artist or more of a scientist? And what are the connections between the two? The fact, of course, that we both rely. I think you need to dream. You need to be a dreamer to be a researcher. In a way, you need to show some intuition, and you need to be imaginative, I guess. So in the end, I'm just wondering if that's your ancestor or mine, or maybe both. I don't tackle science directly in my cartoons. Science comes up with the topic, of course, so I cover current events, and of course there is sometimes topics related to science. I did a few cartoons on the CERN accelerator, of course, and I found very interesting. I described the sheer joy of the scientist when he first had to play with this giant circuit of spinning protons, and it might have reminded him of his first electric train. Going round and round. It's also a very personal cartoon because I had a very nice electric train myself.
Rosebud.
Märklin. I am a sort of a geek. I love topics related to space. I find them very inspiring. Climate change is, of course, an interesting one, because one of the reasons it's full of contradictions, contradiction between the citizen and the consumer that we are, between our ideals and our actions. So that's a good material for cartooning. And so I joined the two topics here in this cartoon. And of course, artificial intelligence is a phenomenal topic. It's been 2 years now that we have really focused on that, and I did a few cartoons on the topic. Of course, this one is, I think it's 2 years old, almost. And as I said, the mysteries of space. I was fascinated by the first photo of a black hole. Was 2019, I think, and I did this cartoon. Really, really troubling similarity, don't you think, Tom? I don't know.
Yeah.
Voila.
Bravo.
Thank you very much for sharing that with us, your drawings, but also your humor. It's really, really great. It made me think of a lot of questions, but I was told that I had to restrain myself. So I'm going to ask with an easy one. And since we're here at some college, I know that you, Tom, you work at the moment with Yale University. Can you tell us how it occurred, or just a bit about that?
Sure. I'm wondering whether to treat this like a political question and just ignore it entirely and say whatever I want to say. So I went to Yale, which helps when they want to hire you. So then they reached out to me to make some cartoons for them, like this one, for example. Kids used to want race car beds, but that was before climate change. I don't know if this is a thing in Switzerland. In America, it's very popular for kids to want to sleep in car-shaped beds, like you're imagining you're a NASCAR or Formula One driver. But now, of course, you prefer a lifeboat. It's much more better to have a future, with a lifeboat. And Yale found that they were getting, when they did articles about climate change and they attached a cartoon to them, they got a lot more attention. They got a lot more clicks and engagement online and through social media, and so they wanted to do more and more and have as many articles as they could with cartoons attached to them. So I read the articles and I distilled them into a few key ideas, and then illustrate them in a way that is human and personal to an experience that you might identify with. And they find it extremely useful for spreading the word on social media and getting people to pay attention with our diminishing attention spans as we scroll through reels and stuff like that. So it's both an effective tool of communication and also a way to deliver the ideas succinctly and impactfully and memorably. So I find that very meaningful work. Here's another one that I did for them. Ha! I didn't become the mayor of Atlantis by listening to a bunch of pesky scientists. As he's ignoring their warning of what's to come. Make Atlantis great again. Right? So this was another one on the upcoming election, or not the upcoming, the past election. I haven't absorbed the reality yet, so I apologize. I'm still living 3 weeks ago. So they were doing an article about, how climate change was playing a part in the political debates leading up to the election. And I did this cartoon for them for the series of articles they were doing on that, which helped them to get a lot of engagement and attention. So that's my involvement with them. It's been very fruitful.
But Patrick, you, apart from the honoris causa doctorate, PhD, you also have an experience with an American university. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, so it's not so much in conjunction with science. It was 2014, we moved to Los Angeles with my wife and Frédéric. You're from Los Angeles, right? So
I'm from California, yeah.
Your place, okay. Yeah. Very nice. And the reason for moving to Los Angeles was because I got a chance to be a visiting fellow at USC, University of Southern California, and during that year that we spent with the whole family there, we came up with a project called Windows on Death Row, and it's actually related to the idea that art can simplify, communicate, help people. Scientists or experts communicate on topics, and we thought we want to tackle the issue of death penalty in the US, and it's a tricky one, so let's try a different approach through art. So what we did through this project, we commissioned art from death row inmates, and I asked my fellow US political cartoonist friends to send me their work, so it was a shared exhibition between death row inmates and political cartoonists, and all that was, of course, an excuse to tackle the issue and trigger a discussion on death penalty in the US. So it started in USC 2015, and then it toured actually universities across the US, North Carolina, Texas, interesting places. And I forget some of the places, and it ended up in Columbia Law. And each opening was a chance to get speakers and experts. You see Sister Hélène Préjean on the right of the screen. She's the writer of Dead Man Walking. On the top, I forgot her name, the writer of Orange is the New Black. So all this is, again, an excuse to use art to trigger a conversation. And the best compliment we got was someone visiting one of those exhibitions and telling me I was against the death penalty when I came in, and I read all the captions and looked at the art, and there were a lot of QR codes, people could see informations, and she came out actually against death penalty, so that was nice. And there's still, if you're interested, there's still a website from that experience. The closing exhibition was in 2018 in New York, and windowsondeathrow.com, you can still see the art of both the inmates and the cartoonist, and you can see many developments and explanations on the situation of the death penalty. Voila.
That's really, really, both of that is really great. But when you work for universities or on serious or scientific topics, do you have to do specific research in order to be accurate, or do you just go with the flow and what you think you know?
That's a good question. Yeah, for like I mentioned, the Yale cartoons, it'll be very particular to the given article, so I'll have to read it. There's no way that you can achieve the same sort of expertise that the researchers who wrote the article have, and so you maintain a fairly surface level understanding, but the key points you want to communicate succinctly. I feel a bit silly going to my cartoons after your death row. Brilliant work, by the way, thank you. So here's one about research I just wanted to show. The basic building blocks of life are identical in all species. These very serious scientists getting to the root of their discipline here. Thank you for letting me speak in English, by the way, and thank you for speaking in English. Je parle français comme vache espagnol, but
that's a good one.
So, and I also wanted to mention about the research topic. When I was first starting out as a cartoonist and I was struggling to really hone my voice and decide what topics to address, I happened to hear an interview with the comedian Jon Stewart. Most of you might be familiar with Jon Stewart, did the Daily Show in the United States. And he was doing an interview with a journalist who was trying to get him to admit that he was actually a journalist and not necessarily a comedian, because he does news-related comedy. And he refused to accept the title of journalist. And he finally said, all the research that we do, all the fact-checking that we do for our comedy is not for journalistic purposes, it's for comedic purposes, because jokes don't work unless they're true. And that sort of lit up like a neon sign over my desk, right? Jokes don't work unless they're true. They don't have to be complicated. It doesn't need to be, exhaustively footnoted PhD dissertation, scientific research truth, but it has to be true not only on the human level, that you understand the situation that is being depicted to you, but the basic facts of it have to be true. Otherwise, someone can disregard the premise of it, and it doesn't have any relationship to your lived experience or to the reality that you observe. So that is sort of a mantra that I try and stick to. Jokes don't work unless they're true, because otherwise you're just dealing with an absurdity and you can't take a lesson from it, take a deeper resonance from it. So as far as research goes, I try and at least stick to that standard.
So there'll be no fake news jokes?
Yeah, exactly. Alternative facts. We call them alternative facts.
It won't exist, no. Though I've seen some pro-Trump cartoonists that are really in the world of fake news, I think. Have you seen some of them?
Yes. In America, there's a large community of, more conservative, reactionary cartoonists and online artists. I mean, now we get into the question of what is truth and whether or not we live in a shared reality.
Yes.
Right. That's another topic.
Yeah, true. And same question to me.
Same question for you.
And when you asked that question, I was like, no, actually, I did not do any research for any work I did. And I thought, oh, actually,
He's achieved a lot in life. He can't read.
Actually, I published a book in 2022, which was a comics reportage, and I'm a big fan of Joe Sacco, who lives in the same city of Portland. He lives in Portland.
I moved to Portland
not
recently.
New York.
Yeah.
So comics reportage is my second life. If I had a second life, I would do that all the time. And that's a full-length book, and it was basically the first diary of the COVID made during the first wave, and it came out in October 22. So really, it was at the same time live documentary and also kind of a scientific explanation of the thing as it was unfolding and as we understood it at the time. So that's why I was following people at the Geneva Hospital and getting their explanations of what was going on. So it would be interesting to read it again today, because I understand, of course, that the research on COVID has evolved a lot. But that was my work, which was the most related with scientific research, and I worked hand in hand with doctors and experts during those months.
And I really wanted to ask you if the reception varies between your cartoons depending on the topic. For instance, when you talk about climate change and you post it online, do you have different reaction from the audience than when you talk about just being fun?
Yeah, that's a good question. The reaction, there will always be, especially in social media, it elicits a lot of feedback and a lot of comments, mostly supportive, but there are always men, and it's always men, who choose to post comments, especially with climate change topics. Here's one I did about climate change. Let's see who's growing faster, you or the sea level. I like how the father is sort of enthusiastically measuring both and not bothering to actually address the problem here. So like even a cartoon like this, which seems relatively innocent.
Really?
Yeah. Well, you don't think it looks innocent?
You got, no, I mean, you got pushback?
See, I told you it's always men. They always come.
You got a lot, you got a lot of pushback?
Oh yeah.
Really?
So they'll you know, when Yale will share it on their social media, there will always be comments where they go, well, actually, it's always the well, actually, sea levels have varied over the course of time. And there's going to be people who point toward sort of, you can almost predict what the reaction is going to be given the certain set of, you know, sort of debunked facts that people always bring up in order to try and poke holes in your argument. But the climate change ones receive pushback, but even the personal ones receive pushback. Like I posted one, I don't have an example of it, but it's just it was a cartoon about a dog, and there was a person throwing a ball for a dog, and the person was thinking, I love how they take joy in simple things. And the dog was also thinking, the pressure of alleviating his depression is crushing me. And a lot of people posted, this is really insulting. I've suffered from depression for a long time. You know, people take it very personally, which I actually take as a compliment that they read so deeply into the characters and found them identifiable. But when in the realm of social media, it's an interactive forum where people will respond, and you have to just go with it and let people have space for their feelings.
Are you on X, Twitter, X?
I got off Twitter. I quit Twitter.
You did?
Yeah. Same question to you.
Same question to me. And
Thank you for doing my job. Same question for you, Patrick.
And I'm not answering your question about pushback on climate change because I have other examples in mind. It's starting now. It might get bigger. The pushback on issues like climate change. I noticed a change. You mentioned social media. 2 weeks before the Trump triumph, the Trumpists everywhere in France and Switzerland were getting really vocal on social media, so insults increasing and stuff like that. I'm still on X, but but pushback we get a lot for political stuff, of course, and not for the cartoons you expect sometimes. Like I did a cartoon that I thought was kind of innocent on India overcoming China in terms of population, and that cartoon was published in Der Spiegel in Germany, the magazine for which I do a weekly cartoon, and it became a geopolitical crisis. But in this case, it is the government. It is an assistant to the Minister of Communication, which lit up the flame on social media, denouncing this cartoon as racist. The representation of the Indian train versus the Chinese bullet train. But look at all the joy. I mean, I would be on the Indian train. Plus, it's winning the race. Plus, if you Google India train, but anyway. But that became big. And
did your research?
I did, and usually. Shitstorm, sorry, that's French. It lasts for a week, and that's long, and you feel pretty lonely. But that lasted for 2 weeks, and it was not social media; it was all the media in India, the press and TV, international media, Guardian, all you want. 2 weeks after my cartoon was published, I got CNN, I got RT television, the Russian channel, of course, too happy to pour some petrol on the flames. They did a, how do you call that? A person on the street interview.
Yeah, man on the
Delhi,
street.
man on the street interview. So, did you see that cartoon? And people saw the cartoon.
Wow.
So that was interesting. And just to finish on that, so I had another big storm like that on another cartoon, which was on the US Supreme Court decision, and I drew the Taliban and was denounced as an Islamophobe. But what was interesting is the discrepancy between the feeling you get of being pounced by all sides for a week and the actual numbers on the Twitter feed, positive reactions, positive retweets, and bad comments. And I would be interested in, I don't know if the EPFL is doing some social media analysis, but today more than ever, I would be interested in getting more information about how we can analyze the social media storms and how they gather and what they mean exactly, because there is a difference between the feeling you get, and a lot of institutions, schools, governments, companies react very strongly to the pushback they get, but when you analyze this closely, it doesn't match the actual importance of the reaction. You know what I mean? It's social media is a distortion field, but it has a lot of impact on actual decisions. So that would be interesting.
So I had a last and quick question, since we have to get back on track.
Yeah.
And we mentioned him a few times, the elephant in the room. Do you think the politic reality, like the upcoming Trump years, will affect your work in any way? And you, Patrick, do you still work for American journals? If yes, feel free to answer. If no, feel free to answer too.
You first.
Me first? Yeah. Moment of silence. Yeah, it will. It will. I mean, we have to. I think you have to live up to the moment. I mean, the role of a satirist is to speak truth to power. I mean, it would have been, even if it was a Democratic administration coming in. You know, your role is to hold power to account. And it reminded me what you were talking about the reaction that you got. There was the most famous American political cartoonist, Thomas Nast, was working in the early 1900s. For a newspaper in New York City, and the mayor of New York was sort of a mob boss and held the city under his thumb, and had an enemies list, much like Richard Nixon, you know, kept a secret enemies list. And at the top was this political cartoonist, Thomas Nast, and his advisors were sort of baffled by that, because there was also journalists who wrote bad articles about him. There were his own political opponents who were always trying to kick him out of office. And he hated the political cartoonist the most. And they asked him, why do you hate this cartoonist? He seems relatively insignificant. And the mayor said, my voters can't read, but they can see pictures. So he understood the power of, you know, the image to move the masses. And I think we're almost back, social media has almost flipped us back into that world where that has more sway over these major decisions, just based on the reactions, the emotional reactions that they conjure from people. But here's a Trump cartoon that I did back in 2016. Don't worry, I'm tweeting that climate change is fake. Now I would have to say, don't worry, I'm Xing that climate change is. See, it's just not as, Elon Musk is not smart. That's not the right sort of verb. And here's one from the most recent election. We've stared at the electoral map for so long, it's become a magic eye poster. Because in America, we obsess over the districts going blue or red, and then you've stared at it and there's a purple dolphin coming out at you. You've totally lost the picture. It's become hazy. But I think that's where, you know, in the realm of science, the importance of communicating to people the importance of climate change, what we just lived through in America and in a lot of places that had elections recently, is the triumph of feeling over fact, right? We elected a president who's a convicted felon, who's an adjudicated rapist, who has committed treason against our country, the first time in American history when there was not a peaceful transfer of power. He tried to violently overthrow the government, and he got reelected on a wave of feeling, because fact was powerless in this media environment that we live in. And cartoons are capable of marrying those two things, of actually communicating fact with a dose of emotion, with a dose of feeling and identifiable, creating a relationship between an audience and an idea. And I think if we can ally science and cartoons, facts and cartoons, then we might be able to sort of steer people back in a rational direction. But that's just what comes to me when I think about the next 4 years.
So to your question about the New York Times, so it's true that the New York Times put an end to my contract. I had been working for almost 20 years for the Herald Tribune and then the New York Times. And in 2019, after a cartoon that was not by me, which was interesting, but they reprinted a cartoon from a Portuguese paper on Netanyahu and Trump. And that did not go well. There was a lot of pushback. It was denounced as anti-Semitic. And the New York Times decided that the simplest way to deal with a complicated cartoon is not to have any at all, which is logical if you think about it. So preventive self-censorship, it's what they invented then. And I've been working since for the Boston Globe, so it's a nice thing to have still have a foot in your beautiful, joyful country. And I'm just going to show a cartoon with the magic team getting to the White House with the future head of the health department and all those brilliant people. Good luck.
Good luck.
We'll be here for you.
Thank you. Thank you.
On those words of hope. As you've shown briefly, Patrick, cartoons are not the only way to mix text and images and sequences. Comics do that too, and we've got here at EPFL. Before that, we will soon have Q&A session. So if you've got good questions, you can scan, I insist on good, you can scan the code here, and you will be able to write down a question. Please write down the name of the person you want to ask it to. If you don't have ideas, it's not a problem. You can just like or dislike the questions of others. It's like social medias here in the EPFL. So yes, just feel free to scan the code and to ask you questions. So we have here Sarah Bonella, who is at the origin of 2 comics on science. She's not an artist, she's not a drawer, but she's really important in making those books, Comics and Science, and Chercher les femmes. And she works here at the EPFL, and we thought it was really interesting to know that people here take it that seriously in order to be a serious subject. So can you tell us more about that?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me here. Tough act to follow, really. Not being an artist and not being a cartoonist, it's going to be a different perspective. So this all really started with the dissemination plan for a big project that was funded and that we coordinated here at EPFL. Now, as the scientists in the room may know, when you get a big project funded, there is an easy and fun part, which is do the science. And then there is something that is really, really scary, which is you have to explain the science that you're doing to the general public. So we were looking around for a way to do that, and we felt that comics, for all the reasons that have been discussed up until now, could provide us with a medium that was both original and effective. So we started this adventure of trying to explain, in this case here, why using large computers to model physical systems was an effective strategy. And then this, we may see a little bit more about that later on, and we decided to tell this through a story, so not trying to really be literal in the way in which we were describing the thing, but by turning a scientific research into the quest of a knight that had to free a princess, with a bit of a twist toward the end. Then this turned out to be successful, and so we felt that it was a good idea to also use comics to try to get across messages that all of us scientists care about. For example, the fact that we still don't have enough women involved in STEM faculties. And so we decided to try to invite young women to think about a career in science through another story. This time we invented like a thriller in which we have a young investigator, Augusta, sitting there, who is sort of competing with a not too nice, pompous Sherlock Holmes character to try to solve a mystery. And she does that by using ideas from science. And so we published this second item called Chercher les femmes. So it's like an exhortation for that.
And how did you find a good balance between fiction and the pedagogical content? Because, yeah, it's always a trick. How do you keep entertaining, but also giving information?
So first of all, I really hope that we did find a good balance. It's not easy, not at all. Then there are a couple of things that I have learned through my interactions with the artists that helped us here. And one is don't tell too much. So try to find a key message that you want to get across and use the art to illustrate that message. So I told you that we have a knight, here is his, who has to free a princess. He goes to a sorceress, that is our sort of incarnation of a scientist, and she helps him to find a way to beat the dragon by sort of using, like we use computers, little cauldrons to simulate the combat between the knight and the dragon. And the message that we wanted to give was, you start from very simple models. Here we have the spherical approximation of the knight and the dragon, and from small computers or cauldrons. And then as you improve the model, here we have the stick and ball model of the knight and the dragon, and you have more powerful cauldrons or more powerful computers, you can get to, a high-performance cauldron that gives you a model of reality that is very, very close, and it helps you to find a solution to what seems to be, an unbeatable problem at first when your model is too simple.
So, as you were not a drawer nor a scenarist, we say that, what was your implication in the project as a scientist?
So I was the other face of the mirror that Tom and Patrick just described, right? So my job was to try to interact with the artists to convey the scientific content that we wanted to give. So for the second story I told you is a thriller. We have this young girl investigator that uses scientific process, and in particular algorithms, to sort of guide her investigations. So, the first thing that we had to start understanding with the artists was, what is an algorithm? How do you draw the flow of informations and instructions that take you from this is the problem to this is the solution? And so this is like the first sketch that we drew together. And then they came up with an idea to try to reproduce that in a comics page. And that was their first proposal. It's in Italian because the artistic team was Italian here. And then I really had to play the bad cop with them to explain that no, actually what you should draw is something that looks like that. But through iterations and agreeing on the content and how to balance the content and the art in the comics, we ended up with the results that I hope people have appreciated. And just to give you the final result of that, before we colored it, this is how Augusta figures out who is the spy in the game.
And let's be honest, the two here are nice, but was it easy to collaborate with artists?
I mean, the question is also, is easy for artists to collaborate with scientists, but for me, yes, it was easy. It was easy in the sense it was always a very interesting, collaborative, and constructive process. Sometimes, and it's also incredibly instructive for us as scientists, because when we say things, we explain things, we are convinced that we are incredibly clear, and that anything we say, is obvious to the listener. And interacting with someone who doesn't have the same background, but who is committed to trying to convey the message that you're trying to convey, is a great, great training exercise to really isolate the crucial parts of a message. Other than that, I agree with what has been said. Creativity is a big, big glue between the way we live our daily lives and the way artists live their daily lives. We use equations to represent our ideas. They use drawings, but it's always a representation of reality that we are trying to put on the table. So yes, it's easy. And it's a lot of fun, too.
And now that it's out in the world, how do you use both of these projects?
A few different ways. So we are invited to science festivals, mostly in Europe, and we go with the comics and we discuss the comics, and typically the artists are with us, and so we can use them. Cherchez has also found a second life because it was intercepted by two young actors that really liked the story and decided that they wanted to really play it for us and with us during this type of events, and that works out really nicely. And also we are collaborating with schools where we are invited to present these talks. And so, yeah, I mean, it's typically a very interactive process. The comics is kind of a key to open a door towards a conversation with different people.
So the comics are really great. We put it some on the outside of the room, so I hope they're still left. If not, you can find them online. It was a great choice to put them free of access. I
Yes,
think.
absolutely. These are for the public, and if you can't find them on the SECAM website, go and have a look.
Or try to run and see if you can be the first for the last copies. I had a question myself for all of you who want to answer it before giving the mic to the public. I wanted to ask, because we talk a lot about the recent breakthrough represented by artificial intelligence. Do any of you fear to be replaced by a machine someday? We said it was Tom first.
Yeah. I don't at this point. I don't fear artificial intelligence. I don't agree with the name artificial intelligence. I don't like the way it's being developed. I have moral qualms with that, in the way that it's being used to scan, artworks without consent from artists. That I think is terrible. But when you're an artist and you're starting out, you're very interested in trying to, replicate faithfully your idols, the people you admire, the artists you admire, and you're frustrated by the mistakes that you make. And then at a certain point, you realize that your mistakes are your style. Your mistakes are your individual style that make you unique and that make you different. And I think making mistakes is something that artificial intelligence can't quite do, right, yet. How do you program something to intentionally have an error, an accident, that leads to a discovery? I think that would be interesting if that ever happened. I don't fear it now. But as a cartoonist, you're always trying to break logical connection. You're trying to create unexpected, incongruous leaps between seemingly unrelated topics and find those surprising connection points, which don't have a basis in logic necessarily. So I'm not too worried about it now. I am worried about potential clients becoming lazy and falling back on inferior things instead of relying on artists that can create better things. So I fear the capitalist marketplace. I don't fear the survival of art being created by artists. Being able to make a living as an artist has already been made challenging by the internet and social media, and I think artificial intelligence will make that more challenging, but we have to confront it.
And you, Patrick?
Well, I think AI will be able to create, it is able to create jokes, good ones sometimes, not a few, not all the time, but sometimes. I think it will be able to create maybe cartoons, funny cartoons. By the way, I don't know if I was told a few months ago that my name was on the list of artists which were used by Midjourney, and there is a class action suit in the US.
There is a class action, yeah.
And there's hundreds of artists and illustrators. I don't know if you...
I'm not involved, no, I don't think so.
You should check if your name is on the list. And I was lazy and I did not join the class action suit, but that is one thing. Copyright is one big issue. And I think we're going to lose on that front now that Elon Musk is the advisor of President Trump, and the whole trend is going to go more toward that industry rather than toward the copyright aspect of it, but we'll see. And otherwise, the ability for the machine to create funny content, I think that we're going to see that, yes. The thing that it will not be able to do is to be, how can I say that, is to be consistent. I mean, it can do random good stuff, but it cannot have a personality, and it will never have one, I guess. So that's where we have a little advantage, is that you appreciate a cartoonist for his personality in the end. Because it's not just one joke, it's the whole body of work that you get to learn and appreciate. So on a random basis, like through memes, I think AI can do excellent memes, but as a whole, I think we are safe in terms of having our own personality and creative world that is unique. Voila. We're going to win.
Sarah, do you feel afraid of being replaced?
It depends a bit on the day, but no, usually. I mean, I think at the moment I see AI, machine learning as tools to do some of the menial things that we do or that we had to do in science more effectively. Not just the menial things, there have been, you know, remarkable achievements. In my bravest moments, I'd say that I welcome the challenge, because it's important to consider that these are also things that push us to investigate more deeply what it is that makes us, you know, a unique resource for society, if we are, I mean. And I just think that this is a foe that should be looked at also as a friend.
Laurence, any fear? She said to me, she was like, oh, my fear is I'm the only one not replaced. So everybody's an AI, and I'm the only one left here. And I think it's a good fear. No, the public has a lot of questions. The one most liked is, are there topics you would refuse to make a cartoon about?
And Tom goes first. Because he's our guest today.
Do I fear to make a topic about it? Let's see, how do I answer with my family in the audience? No, I don't think so. I mean, yeah, I think anything is fair game. I think there is stuff that I would just not be interested in doing, or that I would feel bad about making a talk about, you know, making a cartoon, making fun of, you know, houseless people, that sort of thing. Like, the role is to punch up, you know, for a satirist. You always want to make fun of power and hold power to account. So as far as, you know, the more powerful, the better, you know, and I think that the stronger the satire can be against it. So I think, as far as that, no, I'm really not afraid of much.
Okay. I think I'm going to skip right away the Muhammad cartoons discussion. Though it's going to be 10 years since the Charlie Hebdo massacre, and we're going to be talking a lot about that, and I've mentioned that a lot, and we could spend 2 hours having a discussion on that. Just to say, it's not about religion. Religion is not in itself interesting. It's always about politics. And when politics and religion mix, that's a fair topic to address for a political cartoonist. And otherwise, in general, I would say very bad news and very good news are not good material for cartoons, so I tend to avoid them. I don't know if it makes sense. But there's not much you can add to something terrible, which happened, like 9/11. The collection of the worst cartoons you can put together were maybe the cartoons that were published in the week after 9/11. There was nothing much we could add to except doing some very empathic, you know, emotional cartoons. Statue of Liberty crying, we got that a lot, you know what I mean? So I don't think that's where the political cartoon can add something to the equation. And same with the very good news. You're just happy. You're just like, oh, and you want to do a positive cartoon, and it's not where we are good, the best. It's always the gray area, the in-between area. And I mentioned climate change because that's where you have contradictions. And contradictions is a very good starting point for political satire, I believe.
Yeah, I would say Patrick makes a good point on that. It's not so much a matter of topic, it's a matter of timing. Right, because if you have to give something enough time in order to have a perspective on it, otherwise, the worst thing you can do is to make a cartoon that, in retrospect, is embarrassing, or, you know, because you've done it.
I have some of those.
Yeah. So you want to avoid that. I'm not so much afraid of pushback as I am of not liking my own work, you know, years later.
So regarding that, a following question is, both humor and satire often walk the line between funny and offensive, especially about contentious issues. You both mentioned receiving negative reaction to your work. How do you judge where to draw the line when this is so subjective?
Say it again.
Yeah.
What was the end of the question?
How do you draw the line between being offensive and being funny?
People do.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to the thing about the humor not existing outside of context. You know, something that exists on a stand-up comedy stage could be extremely offensive at a dinner party, you know? So there's nothing that you can translate from location to location to location and have it work with any audience in any context. But humor doesn't work unless it has a bit of iconoclasm. There has to be some transgressiveness to it. Otherwise, it's not delicious. It doesn't attract us. It's not, it's not something that we recognize as, oh, I thought that secretly, but I was too afraid to say it myself. There's a metaphor that the cartoon editor, Bob Bankoff for The New Yorker, uses, where he uses a series of 3 slides, and in one slide, there is an empty cage, and he says, that is, it's a metaphor of a zoo. I'm trying to think of how he does this. He says, this is a bad zoo where there's no animal visible in the cage. This is a good zoo where the animal's just on the other side of the cage, and this is a terrible zoo, and the animal's outside the cage, jumping in your face. So where is the cage? We want the tiger to be just over there, but not on this side. So you want to address a subject that has enough bite to it, that has enough transgression, but keep it so that it's actually still inviting and wants you to look at it, wants you to spend time with it.
Yeah. And I think it's a central question today because it relates to many things. How do you draw the line yourself? That's one thing. And how does society or the government, depending on in which country you live, or we mentioned Charlie Hebdo, people from some groups, draw their line or interpret what you do. That's where the balance is complicated. The classical, red line drawing is in countries that are not democratic, where what you can say is limited, and the role and the test of political cartoonists is to see until which point they can go, and that's not written in the law. They have to find for themselves, and that's why on this we have a foundation in Geneva, the Freedom Cartoonist Foundation, and we award a prize every 2 years, an international award to cartoonists in especially dealing with very difficult circumstances and doing an act of courage by doing their daily work. And today, in our democratic, very open societies, we have a tendency of people to draw their own lines. People can feel offended by content. Humor is very much at the center of many discussions, as you know, in our societies. And as for me, I think the line to be drawn is between, for me, my personal rule is if I can explain eye to eye a cartoon to someone who feels offended, I mean, just this is what I want to say, this is my point. Now I can control this, I can control my message and my line. I cannot control what you do of it, how you feel about it. Then there is something in between you and me, which is the law. It's very simple. Defamation, insult. Even before the law, there is the journalistic, since I work in the media, you have some bodies you can complain to, les instances de la presse, where you can complain, and there's the law. And in between, it's a whole debate in society as to what is offensive and what is not. But I think we need to be bound by very understandable rules to function in society. And I think the place of humor is one that is in debate today.
And a contrario, do you have any regrets for not speaking up or publishing a cartoon about an important topic out of self-censorship or lack of awareness? Like, oh, I should have done that. Okay.
That's a good question. I mean,
some of Tom's cartoons, I should have done them.
Yeah. I noticed a few ideas that I think I had first that you drew. You think you stole them from me?
We'll check.
I mean, there's just never enough hours in the day. There's so much. It's almost we have access to so much information now. When you're looking for inspiration for a topic, it's almost overwhelming, and it's inexhaustible. The news articles that you can look at, the choice of what to address. You know, I'm not in the same position as Patrick, where I don't necessarily go to headlines to try and do my cartoons. But the New Yorker did assign me, for the first month of Trump's presidency back in 2016, I was assigned to be the daily cartoonist for the New Yorker website. So that was a very different change of pace and workflow for me. I had to every day come up with a more political, topical cartoon.
And you're going to regret those cartoons
and, yeah.
when he's back.
Yeah, exactly.
He did
That's
not
why
forget.
I'm here.
He did not forget.
Yeah. That's why I made sure my passport was renewed, before the new administration. Trying to choose what outrage to address, what buffoonery to make fun of, it can be a challenge. And often you just have to really start to then pay attention to what resonates with you, what your own style is attracted to, what your inner voice is most capable of responding to, because you're also in now an environment where pretty much anyone on Instagram is a cartoonist, right? It's all image caption. People are generating their own stuff, and so how to stand out becomes more of a consideration. How can you add your own viewpoint to a topic that you know is going to be addressed by 500 other cartoonists in that same day? So I think it makes you focus more on your inner voice, in regard to a news story. Yeah.
Oh, I can't think right now of topics that I regret missing, but there's a lot of them actually. And what I may regret is maybe that the scope of the topics that I cover is too narrow, and a lot of things get lost. A lot of topics of interest, situations or countries of interest just get lost, and they're not the front page. And for example, for Le Temps in Switzerland, I do the front page, so it has to be one of the main topics. And sometimes I regret not covering, different topics. Voilà, maybe that's it. And otherwise, I often regret doing some cartoons, but because they're not so good.
I want to thank you, all of you, and letting you, there's a lot of people wanting you to display some cartoons here at the EPFL. So you've got here quite an audience. Sure. Thank you very much for all your wonderful answers. Thank you, Martin Vetterli, for inviting us here on stage. And thank you very much for staying here on a Monday night. So a big applause for everybody here.